In this section, we're going to talk about using visualization as a tool in healing and how we can use visualization to help use our imagination to tap into and tune into our intuition. So the little diagram at the left bottom part of the picture is an attempt to describe this process. So we're using our imagination. Now, imagination can be considered the lowest aspect of the intuition in this sense, to tune in and connect with something that's real. So if we look at it in a dimensional sense, we're sort of rising our awareness from the plane of the emotion or the imagination up to tap into our intuition. And when we tap into that intuition, we'll get an experience. We'll experience something. So we could experience nothing. That might be what we're meant to experience in that moment, or we might be able to experience something else. We might experience some feeling, some thought, symbolic or literal feeling or thought or idea. And once we experience that something, the idea then is to lower that impression down to the level of the mind so that the mind can try and describe this experience and not interpret it. And I'll talk about that in a little while, how interpretation, when done too early, can interfere in what we're actually trying to experience. So it's a bit like a painter trying to find the correct colours or language to adequately represent the scene experience. So if you look at a painter, they'll experience something, a scene, and they're trying to paint it. If they look into the little platter of paints, they'll have a certain amount of paints with which to use to describe that picture. Now, sometimes we experience things in our lives and we haven't got the paints or the colours to describe them. So we can't adequately represent it fully with the knowledge base we have, but we can do the best we can and still paint a fairly good picture. So when we have that experience, what the artist is trying to do is to get as close as possible his expression of that picture so that people that are viewing that painting want to go there. They get an experience of that event or that thing that that painter's trying to capture. So if that painting is a really good representation, people will look at it and go, well, that makes sense. That's a really good picture. I want to go there. But if it's a horrible picture and the painter's not very good at expressing what's going on, then it might actually turn people away from trying to go to that experience or deny it altogether. So what we're really doing when we get an experience is we're trying to describe what's going on. Now, the good thing about description is it keeps us open-minded to further information. And this is a bit like gathering pieces to a jigsaw puzzle. The mind will gather the clues. And that's what its job is, to gather clues, to arrange them, to try and relate them, see how they fit together, but it's not to interpret. So it keeps gathering clues and getting bits of the puzzle, and after a while, as it's describing what it's experiencing, you start to get a realization of what it is that you're building. So if you were doing a jigsaw puzzle, you would have enough pieces of the puzzle to know what the big picture is and even know where to go to get the rest of the pieces in some cases. Whereas when you interpret the information that you're getting, what tends to happen is it sort of closes the door. It's like a person's already got their mind made up. And if you go to the little diagram, say at the top, in the middle, this little yellow circle represents us, the person, our awareness. And when we are reaching out to try and experience something, when we're doing a visualization or a meditation, we're trying to connect with the truth, let's say. But if we have a faulty belief, a faulty expectation, or interpretation based on preconceived ideas, whether that's from our education or our upbringing or our belief, that preconception about what that state means gets in the way of experiencing it. So, for example, we may have read different books on spirit and intuition and divine and what all that means. If those descriptions in those books are accurate, then they, like the artist, are painting an adequate picture of what those experiences feel like. But sometimes, especially with religion, for example, the people that interpret those spiritual truths can sometimes put their own twist on it, and therefore you get an interpretation of reality rather than reality itself. So that faulty belief system or expectation almost blocks the perception of information and interferes with our ability to sense the truth. And what can happen in that case, it's a bit like our head, our mind, our brain will have an idea, and we're sort of not even connecting with the object in question. We're connecting instead with our belief system. Our belief system is, in a sense, becomes the object of our attention. So if we go to the diagram in the middle on the bottom section of the picture, we're talking about thinking and feeling. So it's said that energy follows thought. So what we think about, if open and free of preconception or expectation, we will feel. So the middle diagram there, it's like we're thinking. Thinking is similar to looking, touching, or hearing. We're sort of asking a question. And what we're doing is we're sort of like we're using our mind to tap into something. And then once we've tapped in, then we have to be open to the response. If we're trying to do something that interferes with feeling or receiving the response. So then we're supposed to go into observation mode and listening mode and feeling mode, because it's a bit like the motor and sensory arms of the nervous system. Motor is doing, sensory is receptive. So we can use these ideas in visualization to help us to experience things. So for example, if I wanted to observe what was going on over the road, looking at a house, for example, and the window in between represents the mind, I have to be able to look through the mind, connect with the object of perception, and then I can start describing that object, describing it, which is bringing information back to me. So this gets back to that descriptive state. You are describing what you're experiencing, and you're trying to match the words that you know or have to fit the experience so that it adequately represents that experience. Now, what happens when people get into preconceived belief or expectation is they're doing the opposite. They have an idea of what they think something is. They're almost trying to shove the experience, the new experience, if they're having it, into a preconceived box. So it's like it doesn't quite fit, and that will interfere. So we're trying to describe what we see and feel and notice, but we've got to try and remain open to further clues until we get a realization of what that state means. And we're not trying to fit what we experience into a preconceived box. So this is sort of going through this diagram. So another way you can use visualization is, especially if we're trying to tap into something we don't know anything about. So as I said before, you could have read a book on spirit, for example. Now, talking about spirit on a very physical, intellectual level, a mental intellectual level, can be quite different from what that state actually means in reality. So how do we tap into something we don't really know without interfering in the reception of that information about that state? Well, visualization can help here because we can use something we know, for example, symbology, as a ladder or tool to reach or connect with something new, something unknown. And this gives us an experience or a glimpse of the state explored, as I talked about before. So, for example, we all know what a perfect circle looks like. We all know what a straight line looks like. I often use the image of a radiant golden sun. And the reason I like that radiant golden sun is because it's bright, it's spherical, it's multidimensional, and it sends energy and rays out. So not only do we have an image that's got activity and motion to it, it's not static, but the sense of flowing out is really helpful when you're tuning into your own body, because if you have energy that flows from the center to periphery and it interferes, it hits a blockage or an obstruction, you can sense that there's a block to that motion, and that helps us to appreciate where health is not flowing, where health gets deflected or distracted from or bounced off and so forth. So in that sense, we can use visualization, use something we know as a tool. So for example, I might get you to imagine a radiant sun, golden radiant sun. And we might, for example, put that, let's say, on top of our head, for argument's sake. And when we place that symbol on that area, if that area is very, very healthy and already balanced, it'll probably be very easy to think about, easy to do. Then we could move our awareness, put that sun as an image back into, say, into our hearts. And when we place it inside our chest, in our body, and imagine it inside coming out, you might find, for example, that it's not easy to think about. It's even hard to imagine. So when we put it in there, it might change from the original blueprint or image. It might be dull, or it might be crooked, or it might be funny shaped, or it might just not even be there at all. So if you find that you have to think about it, if you have to start going into analytical mode, and you can't even tune into that area, what at least that tells you is there's something going on in the chest or heart area that's interfering with your ability to perceive information. Now, quite often people say to me when they start visualizing, I can't do it. That's their statement. I just can't do it. Because what happens is they put their attention in areas of their body they can't tune into it. And they immediately go into interpretation mode, which is their interpretation is, I cannot do this at all. So this is why when I have clients, for example, I'll use visualization, take them through their body. And if I start in an area where they're already easy and healthy, and that comes back to my definition of health, it's areas where it's easy, that's balanced, it feels healthy, and so forth, it functions. So if you start in a place that's easy, and you get a person to imagine, say, a sun there, they usually don't even think about it. They just say, yep, I can do that, it's easy. But then, when you go to another area and they try and do it and they can't, they then immediately go into, I can't do it. And then you say to them, but you didn't have any trouble, say, above your head where I put it in the first place. So it can't be that you can't do it. You can do it. It's just that there's another reason why there's something happening in the section you're struggling with. So what people have, in a sense, done is they've jumped a step. They've gone straight to interpretation rather than even noticing that they had trouble in the first place. This is something that's occurred very, very commonly over the years that I've been doing awareness work and visualization with people. They don't even realize that step of, I'm struggling, where the mind starts to interfere. So as I said, energy follows thought. If it's easy to think about, it's probably okay. If it's hard to think about, there's a reaction of some form. And that reaction tells you there's something going on. If we acknowledge that reaction, then we can start taking ourselves out of intellectual interpretation mode and say, okay, something different is happening. Now we start describing that difference. And in describing that difference, we're starting to explore what we're really feeling, what is actually there. Sometimes that's very pleasant, sometimes it's very uncomfortable. Okay, so that sort of gets to this picture on the left top corner of our screen. There's a difference between, say, tuning in and tuning out. So the picture on the top left there is a person who's all stuck in their head, they're stuck in preconceptions. When they use visualization, they're just thinking outwards, they're not tuning in at all. It's like wishful thinking. And as they tune out, they're not tuning in, so they're not noticing what's actually there. Their attention is distracted by their thoughts, which is mental external fluctuations or modifications, or their emotions, or something physical. So I've described it here as the head is separate and detached from feeling within, not connected. So this happens in clients all the time. For example, if they've got an issue in their abdomen or their low back or their pelvis, okay, and you get them to try and visualize it, tune into it, it means they're taking their attention from their heads to their tailbone, for example. And then they're trying to describe the experience back. But if they're too much in their heads, what tends to happen is they're going around in circles in their mind. Their mind is, their attention stuck on their mind or their concept of it instead of the actual reality. So that's why I say the head is detached or separate. So somehow you've got to try and get people to notice that all their attention's in their head and they're not attending to the body at all. They're stuck at the head. So you might do a little visualization in that case where you get a person to notice that they're, say, 99% concentrated in their attention in their heads. And then you get them to notice their neck. So it might be 1% of attention's in their neck and 99% of their focus is in their head. So by noticing that in proportion, 99% to 1, you might be able to allow 2% of your focus and concentration to sort of connect to the neck, and then 3, and then 4, and then suddenly it's like 2 rooms where everyone's in one room and no one in the party is in another room. So you open the door between the head and the neck, and you imagine that the people are diffusing into use up both of those spaces. So then once you get a sense of head and neck in balance, you might then add the chest and upper back into your awareness. So you notice the proportion of energy or activity in each, and if you're having trouble connecting to the chest, you might be able to start allowing some of the energy where it is active to sink down into the chest, and so you start connecting head, neck, chest. And then you keep doing that all the way through until you're connecting with your body, and so your head is now able to tune into the tailbone. When you can actually sense your tailbone and connect with it, you can then start describing it. But until you can actually connect, you can't describe anything. You'll be stuck purely in your head. So that gets us back to that second diagram onto the right of that tuning out picture, in that the interference, that interpretation or that getting stuck in your head interferes with sensing the truth. So You have to really connect with what you're thinking about, and then you've got to go into describing mode. And I'll give you a couple of examples of how interpretation can get in the way as well. One way of describing it is, for example, with a friend of mine, I got him to imagine a flower, just a flower. Now, you might notice in some of my meditations, I don't tell you what the flower looks like. And there's a reason for that, because I'm using an image of a flower. And in your mind, you're going to pick a flower that represents health for you. And this is what I did with my friend. I said, imagine a flower that represents health for you. And this might look different for different people. I said to him, I'm going to get you to imagine taking that flower through your body, and I want you to notice what happens to it as you take it through different areas. And this friend of mine, was a fairly intellectual person. He wasn't particularly necessarily consciously open to higher and higher states, but he thought he'd humour me, and he did it. So he said, all right, I'll try. So I said, imagine a flower growing out of the top of your head. He thought about that. He said, yes, I can imagine that. I said, imagine a flower inside your head. So he did that. He said, yes, I can do that. That's easy. I said, imagine it growing in your throat. He said, yes, that's easy. I said, imagine it growing in your heart. And he said nothing. So we waited a few moments, and he still said nothing. So I said, what's going on? And he said, I seem to be having trouble pushing the organs out of the way to plant it in my heart. And immediately I said to him, well, you didn't seem to have any trouble pushing your brains out of the way to plant it in your head. And he thought about that, and he went, aha, I got him. The first time I ever caught him out, because he realized that the brain, the head area, was equally full of organs as is the chest. So he either admitted that he had no brains, or there must be another reason why he was having difficulty in his heart. Because in his mind, he was creating space and planting a flower. So that's how he was processing it. He realized that that wasn't working anymore. There must be something else going on. So now he noticed that there's a difficulty in the heart, and then he was open to exploring what that difficult might be, which means he was now connecting with it, and we could go from the interpretation he was using to another possibility of perhaps why that was in trouble. So that's one way of using visualization. Another way of using visualization is you could, for example, and this is going to demonstrate the difference between tuning out and tuning in. I got, for example, sometimes I do this visualization where I say to a person, imagine yourself as represented by a car, and notice if it's traveling down the road, or if it's still or stuck, or if it's in the forest, or it's on the side of the road, or whatever it may be. So the idea there is using a car to represent yourself, and you're seeing if it's moving, or if it's on the side of the road, or if it's at the repair shop getting repaired. And the idea with that is you're sort of getting a sense of how you are represented by that imagery, and are you moving through your life? And sometimes the scenery and everything changes to reflect what's happening in your state in this moment. But when I suggested this to this lady, she immediately conjured up the image of a beautiful red-hot Ferrari. And this was not what was tuning into how she was feeling in her body, because I could feel her body wasn't representing that. It was purely what she wanted, what she thought. So her attention went out to wishful thinking, to what she wanted. So I said, perhaps not what you want, but what represents you. And immediately the image changed into a beat-up, white, squarish boxcar, which represented how she was feeling in her body at that time. And that car that represented her was actually, as she described it, it was representing what she felt like in her own body. And now she was tuning into what's happening, not purely what she wanted. So there's two interesting ways to use visualization. So as we go through all of the exercises that are coming up in this module and in other modules, we're going to use this idea of tuning in every single case, and we're going to use the idea of describing. So to sum it all up, visualization really is taking the mind on a journey. The idea is you're using it as a means to explore, like, going on an adventure. As we go on that adventure, we walk our way along the process of the visualization, we arrive at different destinations, and that gives us an experience, and then we describe that experience. So if you look at the picture at the top of the diagram on the right, in this sense we're using visualization. It's like a ladder, it's like a tool. It's a way to help us to get somewhere if we're having trouble getting there. So that's an example of someone standing on a rooftop. Now, we don't know what that rooftop feels like to actually stand on, until we get to it. Until we get to it, we use the visualization as a way to approach it. Okay, and once we get there, we can let the visualization go and go purely into describing what it feels like. So this is why I like using symbology. So if you use a straight line, for example, and imagine it through your body, and the line is kinked somewhere, where it's kinked or where it's cut off will tell you where you're in trouble in your body. If you imagine your whole system is represented by a sphere or circle, and that circle is kinked or caved in, or if you imagine the circle filling up with light and only part of it fills, you can use this imagery to give you a sense of what's happening in your own being. So with that in mind, I hope you enjoy the following visualizations, and we'll see how you go. So don't interpret, just explore, describe, experience and describe, and have fun with it. Thank you.